A short Corsican officer with a thick accent and no connections stands before the most powerful generals in France. Nobody takes him seriously. Within a decade, this same man crowns himself emperor in front of the Pope. Every king on the continent must kneel or fight. Napoleon Bonaparte begins with nothing that matters in 18th century France. No noble blood, no Parisian polish, no powerful family. He ends with everything except the one thing he cannot conquer. Born in 1769 on Corsica, just 1 year after France buys the island from Genoa, Napoleon grows up speaking Italian before he learns French. At military school in mainland France, wealthier students mock his accent and his origins. He responds by burying himself in books on artillery, mathematics, and the campaigns of Alexander and Caesar. While other cadets socialize, Napoleon memorizes maps. Ambition burns in him like a slow fuse that no amount of ridicule can extinguish. Revolution tears France apart in 1789 and creates exactly the chaos a man like Napoleon needs. The old aristocratic officer corps flees or faces the guillotine. Suddenly, talent matters more than bloodline. At the siege of Toulon in 1793, a young artillery captain places his guns where senior officers refuse to go. His fire drives the British fleet from the harbor. Overnight, Napoleon jumps from obscurity to brigadier general at the age of 24. What follows is the most dramatic rise in modern military history. From a provincial nobody to the ruler of an empire spanning from Spain to the Russian border, Napoleon reshapes Europe in barely 15 years. Battles that military academies still study today fall like dominoes beneath his command. Along the way, he rewrites the legal systems of an entire continent. But the same ambition that builds an empire also destroys the man who creates it. In 1796, Napoleon receives command of a ragged, underfed army in Italy. His soldiers lack boots. Supply wagons stand empty. Every senior officer in the army outranks him in age and experience. Napoleon looks them in the eye and promises glory. Within weeks, he smashes Austrian and Sardinian forces in a series of lightning strikes that stun all of Europe. Speed becomes his signature weapon. Where other generals plan, Napoleon acts. Egypt follows in 1798. Napoleon sails with 40,000 soldiers and 167 scholars to conquer the land of the pharaohs. He wins the Battle of the Pyramids in a single afternoon, but loses his fleet when Admiral Nelson destroys it at Abu Qir Bay. Stranded in the desert with no way home, most commanders would despair. Napoleon founds an Institute of Science in Cairo and studies Egyptian ruins while his army fights plague. Ambition does not wait for convenient circumstances. Back in France, the government collapses under corruption and military failure. Napoleon abandons his army in Egypt and sails home to seize power. On November 9, 1799, he storms the legislature with soldiers at his back. Terrified lawmakers flee through windows. By morning, Napoleon is first consul of France, ruler in all but name. He's 30 years old. No election places him in power. No dynasty grants him the throne. He simply takes it.
As ruler, Napoleon transforms France faster than any king before him. A new legal code replaces the chaotic patchwork of feudal laws across the country. The Napoleonic Code guarantees property rights, ends feudal privileges, and establishes trial by jury. It becomes the foundation of civil law in dozens of nations that still use it today. Roads, bridges, and canals spread across France. A centralized education system rises. The man who seizes power by force governs with a reformer's precision. On December 2nd, 1804, Napoleon crowns himself emperor inside Notre-Dame Cathedral. Pope Pius VII travels from Rome to perform the ceremony. At the critical moment, Napoleon takes the crown from the Pope's hands and places it on his own head. No one gives him power. He takes it before God, before Rome, and before every monarch watching in horror. This single gesture tells Europe everything it needs to know about the man on the throne. Austerlitz comes in 1805 and proves Napoleon the greatest battlefield commander of his age. Facing combined Russian and Austrian armies on frozen ground in Moravia, he deliberately weakens his right flank to lure the enemy into a trap. When the Allies shift their forces to attack, Napoleon drives through their exposed center and splits the army in two. By afternoon, 2 emperors flee the field. French soldiers call it the Son of Austerlitz. Victory follows victory. At Jena in 1806, Napoleon dismantles the Prussian army in a single day, destroying a military tradition built over a century. At Wagram in 1809, 300,000 soldiers clash in the largest battle Europe has ever seen. Napoleon wins again. By 1811, his empire stretches from Portugal to Poland. Kings and princes across Europe are his brothers, his marshals, or his puppets. One Corsican officer now controls more of Europe than any ruler since Charlemagne. But the continental system, designed to starve Britain through trade blockade, begins to crack. Russia refuses to stop trading with London. Napoleon decides that if diplomacy fails, 600,000 soldiers will succeed where letters cannot. In June 1812, the Grande Armee crosses into Russia. It is the largest invasion force Europe has ever assembled. Drums roll across the Niemen River. Boots crush the summer grass for kilometers in every direction. Nobody marching east imagines what waits ahead. Russia refuses to fight. Instead, Russian forces burn their own villages and retreat deeper into the interior. Napoleon chases a phantom army across endless steppe, while supply lines stretch beyond breaking. At Borodino, the two armies finally clash in a battle that kills 70,000 men in a single day. Napoleon takes Moscow, but finds it empty and burning. Russian fires consume the city before his soldiers can rest. Smoke hangs over the Kremlin for days. Winter comes early. Snow buries the roads. Temperatures drop to -30 degrees. Horses die first, then men. Soldiers strip the dead for clothing and burn wagon wheels for warmth. Cossack raiders attack every straggling column. Bridges collapse under the weight of desperate retreating soldiers at the Berezina River crossing. Of the 600,000 who march into Russia, fewer than 100,000 return.
Napoleon destroys the greatest army in European history in 6 months. Europe smells blood. Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Britain form a coalition that closes in from every direction. Napoleon fights with characteristic brilliance in 1813, but faces impossible numbers. At Leipzig, 600,000 Allied soldiers encircle his army in a battle lasting 4 days. He loses and retreats across the Rhine. In April 1814, his own marshals refuse to fight. Napoleon abdicates the throne and accepts exile on the tiny island of Elba in the Mediterranean. Elba cannot hold him. On March 1, 1815, Napoleon escapes with 1,000 men and lands in southern France. King Louis XVIII sends an army to stop him. Napoleon walks alone toward the guns, opens his coat, and shouts, "Here is your emperor, shoot if you wish." Not a single soldier fires. Regiment after regiment joins him on the road to Paris. Louis flees. In 20 days, Napoleon reclaims France without firing a shot. The 100 days begin. Waterloo waits. On June 18, 1815, Napoleon faces the Duke of Wellington on rain-soaked Belgian farmland near Brussels. French cavalry charges smash against British infantry squares that refuse to break. Artillery tears both armies apart across fields of mud and wheat. By late afternoon, Napoleon needs 1 more hour to break Wellington's line. He does not get it. Prussian reinforcements arrive on his right flank. By nightfall, the French army shatters. This time, the British take no chances. Napoleon surrenders aboard the HMS Bellerophon and asks for asylum in England. Instead, they sent him to St. Helena, a volcanic rock in the South Atlantic, 1,800 kilometers from the nearest coast. No escape is possible. For 6 years, Napoleon dictates his memoirs to loyal companions while his health declines in the damp island air. He rewrites his own legend, 1 sentence at a time. On May 5, 1821, Napoleon dies at the age of 51. His last words, according to those at his bedside, mentioned France, the army, and Josephine. Stomach cancer or arsenic poisoning ends his life. Historians still debate which. A man who reshapes Europe spends his final years watching waves break against black volcanic cliffs. The gap between his glory and his end defines the tragedy of unchecked ambition. His legal code outlives his empire by centuries. Today, the Napoleonic Code forms the basis of civil law in France, Belgium, Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain. Dozens of former colonies across Latin America, Africa, and Asia follow it as well. Concepts he introduces, from merit-based promotion to the metric system, become so fundamental that people forget where they originate. The conqueror fades. The administrator endures. Military academies from West Point to St. Cyr still teach his campaigns. His use of artillery concentration, rapid maneuvering, and decisive engagement at the point of maximum weakness defines modern operational warfare. Clausewitz and Jomini build entire theories of war from studying his battles. Every general who fights in the 19th and 20th centuries fights in Napoleon's shadow, whether they acknowledge it or not.
Yet the human cost tells a different story. Between 1803 and 1815, the Napoleonic Wars kill an estimated 3,500,000 to 6 million people across Europe and beyond. Entire generations of young men vanish into mass graves from Spain to Russia. Mothers across the continent dread the knock of the recruiting sergeant. Glory for one man means grief for millions. Can any legal code or military innovation justify that price? France brings his body home in 1840. A massive funeral procession carries the coffin through the streets of Paris to Les Invalides, where he rests beneath a golden dome to this day. Over 1 million people lined the route. Nearly 2 decades after his death, the legend proves stronger than the man ever was. Crowds weep for someone most of them never met. Memory polishes what history records in blood. A boy from Corsica with a foreign accent conquers more of Europe than any man since Rome. He crowns himself before the Pope. He defeats every army sent against him until the continent itself rises in response. His laws outlast his victories. His exile outlasts his empire. Napoleon proves that a single human will can reshape the world, and that the world always pushes back. Glory and ruin share the same throne.